was out visiting family for like the past couple weeks, so I bought a comic and I read it. I bought Beauty by Kira Scott and Huber. It's a 150-page graphic novel, so I'm going to talk about it. I also just want to mention that this comic includes various like triggers and content warnings. I'm gonna put a post right here so you can see it, but I would say that this comic is for like young adults or adults. It's not for kids or tweens. Just keep that in mind for some of the material that's in the book. I'm gonna be pretty quick with the overview of the story just because I think it's a lot of rinse and repeat. Coddie is hideous, ugly, smelly.
His hair, whack. His gear, whack. His jewelry, whack.
The town doesn't like her. She goes to a Mayday festival, doesn't fit in, leaves, finds a frog, cries because they're both so mutually disgusting. The frog ends up being a fairy. The tear of compassion breaks her spell. Mab, the fairy, grants Coddie a wish for her to be beautiful. And the rest of the book is her getting chased out of locations for being beautiful, falling in love, or at least pretending to fall in love with men for power and money, becoming completely obsessed with her own appearance and the money and the fame and the whatever of being queen. Fraternizing with people, using her beauty. Hey, future me coming back to make a statement. So it's not that she isn't trying to be a good queen in this section. She has lofty goals to help the poor and less fortunate, but she fails to recognize either her own lack of knowledge in like worldly affairs or the risk of overspending in the kingdom, which wouldn't necessarily be something she'd have knowledge of. It reminds me a lot of like Marie Antoinette or the characterizations of Marie Antoinette, and that there's a level of total ignorance in what's going on in her country.
She remains a symbol of everything wrong with the decadent monarchy. A convenient symbol, and an example of the public's appetite for smearing prominent women with their own fantasies and frustrations.
Likewise, she has a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect in the way that she's gained this power very quickly and feels that it's deserved and she should be able to meet the criteria of her station by default, but it's recounted like again and again that she just doesn't have the ability or the know-how in order to hold her station effectively. Because of that, she falls back into being kind of the entertaining, more frivolous role that people associate with her. She is just a pretty face. It also becomes clear to Coddie that her gift from Mab is a bit of a monkey's paw in the way that with a bonus of being beautiful, she has the negative of constant overbearing, unsolicited approaches from men. Even when she's attained a position which would normally place her outside of the reach of anyone except her husband, the position of queen, there would always be men watching and waiting just in case. That starts pretty early in the book, and it's a consistent issue that she has with this sort of blissful ignorance throughout most of the book. Her beauty using her, taking over her life, men taking advantage of her, rinse and repeat, until eventually she's trapped in a tower with her daughter, a prisoner of a king who's obsessed with her. The story ends with her using her beauty to her own advantage, becoming queen, benevolent queen, and closing the fairy gates. That is the fastest way that I can explain the context of this story. It's 150 pages, and personally, I feel like it did a lot of nothing for a lot of those pages. That's my personal opinion. You may really like this story. I really wasn't a big fan of Beauty's character and the obsession with the beauty that she has, that she wanted so bad.
Well, maybe it's just because you're ugly.
Ugly? You gotta be kidding me.
She doesn't grow as a person until the end of the story, and in my understanding and reading of it, it kind of comes out of nowhere. This isn't to say that she has no character build-up. During Act 3, she makes a point of trying to learn to read with help from the queen of the king that has imprisoned her. This is also how Coddie, or Beauty, learns from a story perspective that Mab is an evil fairy and ultimately out to trick her and control her instead of being the good fairy that she thought that Mab was. So that's nice. Although, again, the reader learns that fairly early in the story, so it just doesn't have the punch that you would usually look for and that sort of thing. She uses the knowledge that she gains about Mab in order to trick her into being trapped in a box. But this happens so late in the story that there isn't like the pages left or like the narrative or the weight of this to really mean anything. So it just feels like it's really quickly established and then just like pushed on. Like I personally would have liked to see more of her once she's a developed, fleshed out character than a lot of the pages that we spent on her kind of like enjoying, I guess, / being terrified of her beauty. Okay, so from here I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I liked and some of the stuff that I didn't like. I think I'm going to start off with what I didn't like first and then go on what I did like. So I think one of the hardest things for me is the characters and the pacing of the story. If I didn't make it obvious before, this book kind of drags for me, and I feel like the ending does so much so quickly to kind of wrap it up. And there are moments in the book that feel like they should have like kind of punch or weight that don't, tonally or to a lesser extent the plot. I think the largest example is the death of her only friend who went with her when she moved with the king into the castle, who is infatuated with her as much as anyone else, although it is implied that he was infatuated with her before her beauty. And in concept that's really cool, but they didn't really do anything with it. The king kills her friend as he thinks that Coddie has been cheating on him, and we as readers know it's not true. Coddie says it's not true, and I think that the purpose of it is to show how far gone the king is, how obsessed with his wife he's become, and how willing he is to remove any and all obstacles, basically other men, from her life as a whole. But it doesn't really affect the plot because the actions that happen after probably would have been the same regardless of if her friend was alive or not. The emotional impact of it just isn't there, at least not for me. We don't have enough moments between Coddie and her friend to really have any weight with it or any feelings of him as a character, aside from him looking at her fairly consistently from a distance when she's living and in relationships with other men.
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
I also didn't like how some of the side characters were handled, and I think that stems from the fact that we don't really see them outside of the context of beauty being their whole world. There's only one or two other female characters. I would argue that there's no male characters that really have any personality aside from their obsession with her. I get it. This is a fairy tale. It goes along with the plot and the purpose of the story. I understand that beauty is the driving factor throughout the story, but I don't think that necessarily means that every character's only personality and one note has to be about her. Like, there is another male character that actually never encounters beauty on his own, but his driving factor is still to kill her. Him wanting to kill her becomes his aunt/wife wanting to kill beauty so that he doesn't see her to fall in love with her. We're introduced to a female character named Claudine, who is the sister of the king. She's really interesting when you first meet her. She ultimately falls in love with and marries a guy who is obsessed with beauty, never gets over beauty, and to me that degraded her character, because before that, or up until that point, she is Miss Independent, strong leader, running her country alongside or over her brother, overruling him on things, instructing him, leading him, and leading his country. I don't know, it felt weird for her to end up with the knight who was still obsessed with beauty at the end of the book.
The one thing I cannot buy. Love.
I feel like I'm harping a lot on this book, so let's talk about some of the stuff that I did like about beauty, just to kind of be a little more positive. So the first thing I liked was the integration of fairy tales. I feel like it has more of like a traditional Brothers Grimm take on fairies, which is cool, them being tricky and kind of out for themselves. I don't know, I really liked that. I thought it was unique. Additionally, the art is pretty nice. They use a lot of flat color. It has a very lively style. The colors themselves are beautiful. Like, the palette of this comic is really, really nice. It was enjoyable to look at while I was reading, which is always a plus for graphic novels in general. Additionally, one of the more subtle things that I like is they call Coddie ugly throughout the book, but from a design perspective, ugly her and beauty her really aren't that different, which I think is nice.
The only powder gonna take this and give you
a princess.
It was very sweet to not include things like physical disabilities, impairments, anything like that, to decisively make her ugly.
Well, you know what they say about girls who wear glasses.
I like how similar her beautiful and non-beautiful forms are. I just think it's a nice way to integrate it and say, hey, they look different without giving a definitive kind of feature and harping on that feature. I would say the most noticeable difference is the ears. They're very exaggerated when she's meant to look ugly, whereas beauty, the ears are oftentimes covered up, or when they are shown, they look smaller. But in general, the designs look very similar, which I think is a plus. They also have an epilogue at the end where they show characters who track down a portrait of beauty to show their king, but they're from far away, so their beauty standards are different. It's nice. I think ultimately this story, the story of beauty, is very reminiscent of other figures such as like Helen of Troy, where this story perpetuates the significance of beauty on women and the effect of beauty on women, and it being a double-edged sword where being beautiful can be the cause of potential danger for women. You're either looked down on or mocked for being ugly, or sexualized and sensationalized for being beautiful, and the effect that that has can be negative in both instances. And I think that is a super cool message, especially with such a modern focus that we have on beauty. But at the same time, I didn't really like this comic, which is fine. Not every comic is for everybody. This one wasn't really for me. This story is just kind of meh for me.
And if you are not completely satisfied, well, hey, neither am I. That's life.
I guess I mainly made this video just to talk about it. I don't know if I would recommend this comic to anyone, but I wouldn't tell anyone not to read it, if that makes sense. If you've read it and you really like it, let me know your thoughts and feelings. I'd love to hear them.